Hello, everybody. We're back with Matt Presti. He is the former president of the University of Science and Philosophy. He is a musician, a poet, just all around great guy. And we're lucky to have him back. So without any more introduction, I'll bring Matt in. Hey, Matt, how you doing today?
Welcome again, Luke. Thanks for the invite. Part two.
Yeah. Our first one was pretty good. Covered a lot of bases, I think. So we can jump right in today.
It was great, except I misused a word, cursory. Actually should have been non-cursory, because I was talking about how you can't do just a quick examination of Dr. Russell and expect to really get anything out of it. The cosmology is pretty intense and takes several years. But so a non-cursory course into the Russell works is really what's required. A long examination, if you will. It's something so utterly simple, he said, is the hardest thing to tell. So that's kind of where we're at there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. After I first heard you on Unslaved, probably 6 years ago or so, I got The Secret of Light and was reading through that. And I was kind of like, oh man, like the science part of it, I kind of understood the philosophy, but the science part was a little more complex. But then going through the home study course, which was a year-long course from the university, now I feel like I have a little bit of a better grasp on things. But in even still going through that work for an entire year, like Walter says, you got to just go back and go over it again for another year, because just that year-long course and reading some of his other works is just a little drop in the bucket of the information, right? And now I have a little grasp on it, and that's how deep that work is. A year-long course to just get a little grasp of the knowledge.
Exactly. And in retrospect, Russell said of his divine illumination, his knowledge acquired from divinity, not experiment or observation, but rather the light within, he said, was but a thimbleful of the knowledge contained in an ocean, in God's ocean. So a man of that caliber who had, just the most incredible insights, to say it was but a thimbleful in an ocean of God's sea of knowledge is just an incredible statement. There's a lot we don't know, in other words.
There is. Well, and it's just such a vast work. And especially when you're coming to like unlearn things that you already sort of thought you knew, and, starting from scratch again, it's really takes that kind of a mind who is going to say, hey, I was wrong. Now I want to see what the truth is of the matter.
Sure. And that's part of a journey as well, which is humbling yourself before the great mystery, if you will. But the point of any mystery is to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Sort of what drives humanity. So, those who are attempting to figure it out are on, in fact, some pursuit of truth or another, which is always a good road to be on.
Mm-hmm. Well, the mystery, the my story, some people say. It's figuring it all out, right?
Right. There you go.
Do you want to just jump right into some slides? Because I did show this slide last time and you kind of wanted to explain it a little further.
Yeah, we could run through each slide as you wish and do a little discussion on each one. We had planned to do that last episode, but as things go, there's always anomalies and more expansive communications that occur and sort of get between you and the script, if you will. But yeah, I'm happy to go through those. Cool. I think it'd be kind of cool to do so.
Yeah, I also find it hard, especially for a first interview, to get into the nitty gritty. We got, to do a nice introduction. I think we nailed it that last time. So
yeah, for sure.
But I'll get this slide up here. Hopefully it pops right up. Oh, what's going on here? There we go. You want to read this one, Matt?
Sure. It says, true illumination, if you are going to pass through the gate to inner wisdom, one need only open the doors of their mind. The greatest of all treasures lie in wait for your discovery of what was always there. And I think from a lot of deep reflection, when I thought about what is the gate to inner wisdom, Blake wrote some incredible stuff. Emerson. There's just so much incredible writing from so many different incredible people on the inner wisdom, right? The wisdom within the soul itself, which is your soul as it relates to the connection to the divine soul. And so that connection is really the gate, right? Some people call it the two lobes of the brain represent the Masonic pillars, and you have to walk between them. And that's why I always like to do my example of taking consciousness, which is horizontal, which acts like a seesaw from one hemisphere to the other, and going vertical with your awareness and your consciousness, which is more or less what that entails, is passing through that gate. The food dogs in front of the temple are also a gate-like feature. Many temples have a balanced nature where there's a equal and opposite on each side of the entrance, something to keep out the dark spirits, if you will, in some folklore and some building structures and architecture. And then in others, you have just an incredible, you've got also this Masonic idea, but in some others, like the 400 cathedrals spread around Europe, built by some of the greatest artisans in the world in the Renaissance era. Those speak to the divinity in man's soul as well. And really just going through the gates is entering into, the pillars of Delphi, if you will, are the lobes of the brain. I think it's all metaphoric, but when you take and you can cease the randomness of thought and become more exacting with intent to think intentionally, that's what I mean by getting behind the pillars of motion, going through the gates, entering the realm of wisdom, and operating from that vertical awareness where your body is commanded by your mind. It's not the other way around, where your body is commanding your mind to fulfill its desires, because the body has a whole host of desires. People want another cigarette. They want to go drink. They want to eat. They want to do all these things, extemporaneous things that aren't related to the mind, things that fulfill the longevity of the body. I'm not saying you should starve yourself for 9 weeks so you can write a symphony. What I'm saying indeed is that the body can become secondary when the mind is thus focused enough to articulate its desires, and using the body as a tool will fulfill the desires of the mind to a perfective state. And that's really what great artists do. So.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And that holistic mind, right? Rather than this imbalanced one way or the other. It's like, what was McGilchrist, the master and his emissary, right? With the left and right brain hemispheres and sort of like battling within oneself. So to kind of.
Right. It's the David Goliath, the hero and the anti-hero. You're always in a divisive state. But I speak from experience for myself when I say that vertical awareness is absolutely possible, because I used to suffer good days and bad days. I've sort of reached what I would call a steady state awareness, which is, again, having that vertical. You're basically, see, plus being a first responder, I think that really helped me too, because there's a lot of first reactors out there.
Mm-hmm.
And people who melt down at the first sign of something. We're seeing it all through the political left, this just melting down constantly. And that's prime example of what being led by the, being in front of, outside of the temple, if you will, of wisdom, on the other side of the gates, you're just all emotional. You're an emotional imbalance, a walking wreck of possible emotional imbalance. And there's people on all sides of the political spectrum that act thusly, because they have no conception of the space of inner wisdom, where willpower and intention is derived, where it comes from, where it stems from. And that's really the godly power within each of us, that, if we don't become aware of it, we don't tap it, we don't move into that potential. Basically, we're going along, as I said, in my earlier years, I was a wreck, up and down. One day I'd be happy, the next day I'd be totally pissed off. And, in my being pissed off, I would compound more and more things, right? One time I was getting ready for work, I spill coffee on my khakis, right? And I got a 2.5 hour drive. And so I start bitching. So I change my pants, and then I find myself on the road and I get a speeding ticket doing 75 and a 55. So that's like to fix it with a lawyer, it's like $600. So I'm going to work in St. Louis for 2 days and I'm not even going to make, while I'm there, the cost of what it would be to fix the ticket. Otherwise, my insurance would have gone through the roof. So while I'm there in St. Louis, later in the day, I'm still pissed off and I'm out of balance, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Ultra happiness or ultra sadness is not a state of balance. You can understand, I guess, what I'm saying, but later that day, I get rear-ended by somebody in the middle of Kings Highway, right? In a traffic jam, they just slam right into me. So there was my three things in a day. And I realized that this up and down, this up and down, this up and down, when I had read Walter Russell's first regards to the seesaw, people riding the seesaw of, I really realized then what I had been doing all those days and why I couldn't maintain a steady state. And steady state is where it's at, man, because why would you want to suffer irregularities? I'm not talking about, dealing with shadow or dealing with repressed emotions. That's all healthy work because you can't achieve a steady state without going through that cognitive work and really working those things out. But the steady state is absolutely, I think, what most great athletic sports people, men and women, great kung fu and martial arts masters, great artisans, geniuses, mega inventors, things of that nature, they have this steady state, which allows them to produce 10 times more than the unsteady state mind. That's the reason they do. It's not conjecture. This isn't theoretical. There's a reason certain people attain levels of genius and the ability to produce 10 times more than the mediocre person, because they understand that the steady state use of the mind, they call it different things, but it's still the same in principle, is gaining that vertical awareness, commanding the body to perform the will of the mind as an instrument and a tool, not as an overarching, overwhelming identity whose emotional reactiveness, imagine if we were first reactors instead of first responders, how chaotic would a scene on a fire be, if we all showed up screaming, right? That's why these people aren't first responders, because they would bring chaos. So anyways, there it is. It's pretty much the gates of wisdom, the pillars of wisdom, the pillars of Delphi, whatever the oracles, the oracles are your own brain hemispheres. And it's your imbalanced pulsations of constantly thinking and riding the seesaw between those polarizations. Whereas getting behind motion and forming the brain patterns purposefully with intent is really where it's at.
And you've said it before as well, like operating from that fulcrum point.
Yeah, right? And it's absolutely possible. In fact, it's the demarcation that separates great inventors. Again, more examples of just incredible people that do incredible work. Why do they do that? Because they have the focus and the drive. They're commanding their bodies, not being commanded by their bodies and senses. Mm-hmm. The mind is dominant in all cases. And when you utilize that dominance, you can literally dominate. But from a creative perspective is what I'm referring to.
Well, like in martial arts, for instance, like when you think, like, so doing jujitsu, if I stop and think, oh, hey, I have to do this next, that split second has already passed. It's too late. I'm in another situation that I have to deal with.
Punched in the eye.
Yeah, exactly. Or getting choked or crushed.
We called that, when I did 9 years of ninjutsu training, we called that training hall syndrome. We'd do an arm bar take down 100 times, and then somebody that would go, okay, let's do something different, and they'd throw a right hand instead of a left, and you get punched in the chest because you were going for the right arm bar, right, or the left arm, whatever, and so the training hall syndrome is much akin to the body as it is to the mind and what the brain does. The brain has its own ways of dealing with the world. It expects to have certain outcomes. It expects to, from the ego side of the wave, if you will, which is just total sense-based awareness, and ultimately leads to hedonistic pleasure syndrome. That way of expressing and living in this world is not productive, except for a few times in life, maybe in certain age ranges and discovery periods of life, which is natural to the human growth and progression of the soul. But ultimately, eventually, you want to learn to command the body as an instrument. And then when you command it in such a way, you can also take better care of it, because you control what are called impulses, bodily impulses, emotional impulses. And those can often lead people off the tracks and derail their lives for months or years.
Sense-based stuff.
Exactly.
Well,
Drug users, alcoholics,
okay.
just to name a few, people that are addicted to emotional upset and argument and fighting and, and then violence. There's just all the plethora of all negatively unbeneficial human realm of emotions and responses.
So in our last episode, I wanted to make this correction. I wasn't sure if I was gonna in this, but then you sent me your newest article. What's the name of that article that you just came up with?
Let me see here.
It's a great title. And so I felt like I was like, maybe I won't share this, but
All Battle and No Play, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the War.
Yeah. When you sent that to me, I thought, okay, this is a bit of a synchronicity here. So
right.
Remember when I was saying, like in 2007, I started sort of like, that was the time where I started like waking up a bit. But then even though I had said, my whole life I had sort of been thinking outside the box and I was a bit different. I was almost like a Herman Hesse character, like existential crisis and suffering my whole life. But for a time, and I was into alcohol and stuff like that at a very young age. And so for a time, I just kind of gave up and I tried to live that extroverted lifestyle and, the world of the senses. And it didn't really work out for me. So in 2007, 2008, when I was saying, I've always kind of known about this conspiracy stuff and the spiritual aspect of life, what changed for me then was sort of what reminded me of the title of your newest article, which was, I found the positive side of all this stuff. Michael Tessarian uses the term like, this is holy work, and so that's what changed for me, was an internal change, and then that changed the rest of my life for the better, because I wasn't sort of like, oh man, this existential suffering. It became a joy to study this stuff, and it became a joy to change my life. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to make that amendment. Oh, you're muted.
You'll also find that what you're saying is true when you try to tell somebody about the things you like to study, and they'll go, why are you reading all this negative stuff? How can you just read negative stuff all the time? That tells you that they're in a negative state because they don't want to deal with reality. So they try to call you crazy because you like to, infuse your daily briefs with this kind of information. This is the grand chess game. We live in this world, and things happen on this stage behind the scenes. And it's the behind the scenes. When I was a sound man for 15 years in St. Louis, I wore black, and I dressed, that's my favorite color, black and white, actually, for good reason. I'll explain that some other time. But really, it's the grand chessboard is the game of life. It's the game of all games, and figuring it out and understanding it and researching it is a joy, man. And I tried to be without it. I tried to say, this is making my life negative. But then I found when there's periods of time where if you're inspired, sure, put all that crap on the side, let it lay, as Dr. Russell said once, he said, I shall remove from my sight all which is unlovely and not of beauty. And basically what that means is, if you're going to get creative, you've got to remove certain things in order to have the ability to become creative. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they get stuck in a rut. They may, let's just say, too much news gives you the blues.
Yeah.
Knowing when to put it down, you come around, you become more creative, and you just got to decide what's more important. Knowing the latest stats of AOC and the libtard network, or doing a podcast that might help more people to open up to their potential that's hidden within. So it's really a decision. It's up to each and every person, but certainly when you start to get on that path, and again, I can absorb so much information in a day. I remember telling people in the past 10 years ago, I'd talk for 5 minutes about this. One guy went, dude, you're making my head hurt. Stop. Literally, it's like, but I can handle this. My tolerance is way high
Yeah.
compared to most people, and you just got to know when to say when, but also for yourself, because, too much time in the forest and you're not getting nothing done in the field with the paintbrush and the canvas.
Well, it's like that internal alchemy. It's like they talk about it like the Negredo stage before you get to the albedo, like the blackening before the white stage, right? Like, and it's transmuting that stuff that's quote unquote like negative, transmuting it into a positive action in your life. And I remember the same thing, like back about 2008, 2009, trying to start like documentary groups and this and that with people. And they're like, oh, this is just so negative, so negative. And it actually, remember that scene in The Matrix with Neo, and he says, oh, my eyes hurt. And he goes, oh, yeah, you've never used them before.
Right.
Well, that's how people are like with their brains.
Yeah.
They're like, exactly. Oh, my head hurts. Well, you've never used your brain before, bro.
Well, they have this worldview that's completely artificial, and that's what the Matrix really signifies, is artificiality. And that's why the God of the Matrix is artificial intelligence, and that's why they want to transhumanize everybody with this graphene dioxide and these shots and the nanotechnology and the Bluetooth and all that. It's all to keep people in the Matrix. They don't want people growing into their spiritual nature as they were designed by the Creator to do. Man is a purposeful creation, not an accident. We can get into that later, but ultimately man's purpose is to fulfill the divine mind qualities of which he stems from, that being his Creator. So those who do and those who try are the most inspirational people on planet Earth. There's nobody more inspirational than a Mozart or a Carl Jung or a Walter Russell or a Shakespeare. There's so many who have used their divine connection in their own work, and that's what I've really made a catalog out of. Those are the ones I study, are those who realize their divinity, because they're the most inspirational. And man, when you study and read inspiration, it just charges you. You're ready to go create a whole volume of books or movies or podcasts or all of that. And I can name a lot more examples today than I could 10 years ago of people who are fulfilling their divine purpose and living a divine life. A lot of our favorite podcasters, our favorite authors, our favorite, there's not very many movie makers. I would like to see more of that, more of the things like that are holistic, family oriented kind of, everything's just been so dystopian lately, and it's hard to have a holistic mindset when you're in such a dystopia, divided duality. But every duality moves upon a fulcrum that doesn't move. Every two-way motion in this universe is moving upon something that doesn't move. And what doesn't move is where the power is, including in humanity.
Absolutely. Do you want to get into this next slide here?
Sure. Yeah, we're probably going off the beaten path a little bit.
Oh, that's fine. I just got a weird little thing. It says the meeting will end in 8 minutes. I don't know why that would be.
Remaining meeting time. Well, we better move it up then.
8 minutes. I don't know why that is. Maybe we'll have to start another one after the 8 minutes and do part 2 of this or something.
Yep. You got the video editor, right?
I do, yeah.
There you go. I'd be happy to.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just got distracted there by this little pop-up. Let's go to this next slide, Matt. The Russell Museum, perhaps the crowning achievement of my entire life. After this, I truly feel like I can do anything. The hardest work I have ever done also happens to be the most rewarding work. Imagine that.
Well, that's pretty straightforward. And it was the hardest work. It was the biggest show I ever set up.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I had worked 1,000 shows. I had done more than 1,000 conferences with multiple clients, worldwide, Fortune 500, you name it. And we always had set up and tear out. This was one show that basically I set up with no plans to tear out. So yeah, 64 tons of art, sculpture, and personal effects. We talked about that a little bit in the last episode. We mentioned that a lot of that stuff was awkward and heavy and very difficult to move. And then we had to lift it up 6 feet into the air to get it onto a pedestal with a fork truck. And, you know, how do you keep it from vibrating off and shattering on the floor? You know, all these things were technical difficulties, but I think my whole lifetime is like just one of being prepared to be able to do that. You know, going back to my first job, I had learned certain skills that just enabled me to be able to do that with not ease, but let's just say it was easier than if I had not had that sort of preparation. But ultimately, the greatest reward in that statement was that hard work. In fact, the hardest work I had ever done is also the greatest and most rewarding. And that's really what that means. And so many kids today, you know, even adults, even people into their 30s, 40s, and 50s dread the idea of having to work, you know, and the mind is a hell of a bitch to be under the weight of a constant nagging in the head of how much work sucks. You know, there is such a thing as negative reinforcement of thoughts. And it's, you know, that's not in any way, shape, or form a healthy attitude to have, to negatively reinforce things that keep you from living a more divine life. And that's really where I think the importance of hard work comes in, is because it makes you more aware of your divinity when you work hard, because what's powering you, that desire, is also the desire of the creator, to the degree that you know it is and that you use it knowingly. And I think that's a great reward when you work hard, when you accomplish something, even if it takes 10, 12, 15 years to do it. Every little bit, every little step you take, that work and its completion takes a step towards you. And it's been taught over and over in multiple various philosophies around the world, that basically, when you take a step toward fulfilling the idea of your desire into a body, that body becomes one step closer to becoming an existent form, which emerges to eventually stand before you.
That's what I really got about Walter's work as well, was like building a body for your ideas and your thoughts. And just that concept really helped me to, you know, create more in my life as well.
And that
So,
explains the whole universe. Just that statement.
yeah.
If you don't build the body,
Yeah.
nothing's there.
Nothing's there.
I mean, it's fucking pure simple, right? But yeah, so many people don't get it. You mean I gotta build something, I gotta make something if I want my idea to live?
You mean I
Well,
gotta work?
you know, right. And what does that require? The one thing that most let's just say people in a political spectrum that don't like to work,
Yeah.
you know, they're their own worst enemy.
I got the next slide right here, buddy. This is the perfect one. Check this one out. If I have one piece of advice for the young, it is this: don't ever think that life should be easy, for if it was, it would never be rewarding. Your discontent with the world isn't the fault of your parents, politicians, the government, or God, but rather your failure to work hard for what you truly desire. No man or woman who ever made something of themselves did so without hard work. Effort is the result of one's willpower to act in the face of uncertainty and possible failure. With hard work also comes self-esteem. They go hand in hand. As long as men are free, excuses will never lessen the discontent of your own inaction. Your life is your own. Now live it. Boom. And, and did Walter Russell design this building? Is that correct?
That is correct. That I believe is in New York,
Cool.
and I don't remember the name of it. I'm not very fluent with his architecture. It was probably the least of what I studied in terms of his life, but I know there's at least 2 or 3 buildings in New York that he did head up
Absolutely
in terms
incredible.
of being a builder and architect and such. But yeah, that does say it all. It's a perfect segue out of what I don't want to be, redundant, but that really just said it all. And thanks for reading that.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I love it. All right, Matt, we're going to jump back into these slides here. I've got another great one from you. This one you'll definitely like. Oh, you want to read this one actually,
Oh,
Matt?
you can go ahead, bud.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
All the textbooks in the world are useless if they serve only intellectual conformity. You may read them all and still be unable to grasp new knowledge. Parroting, repeating, and remembering is not knowledge. Thus, learning by rote as a process is rendered inert. The application in one's life regarding self-expression is an integration of information within the very unique quality of self-knowledge, often resulting in originality, authenticity, and true transformational progress.
Yeah, that's an interesting quote because I was forced to reconcile after another deep thought session, one of hundreds and hundreds and not thousands I've done over the years. I'll sit in the garage in the chair and just think, for hours about all kinds of things. And one was sort of I'd say Dr. Russell led me on this path about knowledge, questioning what is knowledge really. Epistemology, what really is knowledge, what is it, and how do we come about acquiring it? And because there's this demarcation between what the senses perceive and then call knowledge, and they confirm through experiment and hypothesis and finally theory and then experimentation. And then there's this sudden knowledge that comes to you that is never existed in a textbook, at least not on planet Earth, let's just say, maybe in some other civilization that came or went or is to come. But all knowledge exists, Dr. Russell said, and it can be ours for the asking. And he basically also went on to say that knowledge is in the soul, and you have to awaken to it. It's not in books. And so when I read that, and I'm paraphrasing again, but basically I thought of a library. I said, really, there is no knowledge in a library. There's just a bunch of symbolic things called words and books, words within books. That's all that a library has in it. And you can read any of that stuff and you could still come out of there as dumb as a rock if you don't do one thing that's required to make it into knowledge. It has to awaken something in you that is called a realization. Whatever it is you're reading, if it's instruction manual on how to build a jungle gym, oh, well, so you put the nut through the hole or the bolt through the hole and put the lock washer and the nut on it and then tighten it with whatever it is, if it doesn't awaken in you a realization, then it's not knowledge, it's just information. And so that's what I realized, that the main mistake in college in the grading system of all educational systems and modalities is that they grade based on parroting, remembering, and repeating, which is again something the Russells remonstrated against. They said it's not the mark of true intelligentsia. It's the mark of a follower only, a parrot. A parrot does one thing, it repeats what it's trained to repeat. And so it's a form of mental training, which is intellectual midgetry, if you will. It's a self-imposed limitation because, again, there's no knowledge in a library. There's only the interpretation of symbols. And you could say, check out the book, The Secret of Light, from a library, if you can find one that has it. And, you can read the words, but what happens in the process of reading words? What is the transition between information becoming knowledge that you can actually use in everyday applications of your life? It's the understanding of the author's intent. And so that's when it becomes knowledge, when it awakens in you something to be indefatigably true, that doesn't wear out. Truth never wears out. It just is. And it isn't social. It just is. So really, it's the discovery and the awakening to these truisms that we discover throughout life. And we often come to those through just one quote, one sentence little quotes that we run across, and we say, that becomes a favorite quote. This becomes a favorite quote. Take everything is as it should be. That's more than just the sum of the words. There's great meaning in that, especially when times of trouble befall the human race or one's own life. And this too shall pass is another saying, for instance, as an example that I look to those sometimes almost daily to get me through situations. And, also really again, just sitting in the garage and thinking about these things for the times that I did. Sorry about the phone popping off here.
No worries.
Basically, realizing that knowledge is something that you awaken to. And, again, you could read all the books, all the news magazines, and it was Mark Twain and Thomas Jefferson both derided the newspaper reader as one of the most unintelligent forms of men walking the planet. I think it was Twain that said a man can read the newspapers his entire life and still know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, what are you reading? What are you taking in? How does it affect you? And it's more than just remembering and repeating. You should not read a book to remember so that you can test and get a high score. You should read a book to understand what is being said so that you can integrate that understanding into your life and do something useful with it.
Well, there's a great presentation by James Hillman and Michael Mead. They talk about education and the difference between schooling and education.
Yep.
Whereas the actual root of the word educate actually means to lead out from within. Right? So it's like that unfolding from within, right? That's what the recognition of those words being true that someone else wrote is not just like, learning by rote. It's actually that it's leading some truth out from within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so.
Yeah. And John Gatto and Charlotte Thompson Iserby, I mean, the roots of the education system are basically tethered to this will to make man into a cog in a machine, in a system, incapable of critical thought, incapable of self-knowledge, and that's one of the demarcations of Illumination, is when you garner knowledge that you did not get from anybody else. And I have gotten my own several times. Sometimes it's in the form of songs or music or writings that I've never seen equaled, at least for myself to be able to express certain things that I had no idea of prior to, learning to listen to what's divine in you, write it down and learn from it, because that is the greatest teacher. Is everything that the great men and women of this world who have come before us, the shoulders of the giants who we stand on, as we spoke much about in the last podcast, was that, the reason they get there is because of their recognition of their own ability to self-learn, self-knowledge and self-learning. And some will say that vocation leads you there. And of course it does, because when you actively study something you truly love, then you start to get more of it. And then even after you've read everybody that you can read who's mastered what you're really into, you start to acquire more. And why is that? And where does that more come from? And that's really the self-learning within that vast ocean of knowledge that is inside each one of us for the asking, as Dr. Russell called it. So really it's momentous. I mean, the great things that the masters of this planet are able to do come from going beyond the player's manuals. It's going into that uncharted deep self, and pulling out these morsels of knowledge that can then, separate you in an even greater way. Let's just say it lifts you up to a point, and you're able to do just incredible things and keep learning despite there being no one better at the subject. So, there's no end to what humanity can do. And that's why I'm always hopeful that despite the situation we find ourselves in, we've got some really incredible people all sharing this planet who are doing this work, in fact, on a daily basis, trying to better the human condition, trying to get at the root and make better all the human relations pollution that we suffer, and really finding what it is to be human and what it is to not be human. We're seeing that every day on the nightly news, if you want to waste your time watching that. But ultimately, the goal of humanity is to be better than the previous generation. And the only way to do that is to bring new knowledge. You can't fix problems of the world with the same level of mentality that created them in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's that removing those limitations that these assumptions and all the schooling and stuff like bang into you, right? So it's limitation after limitation rather than unlimited.
Right.
Is what we should be teaching these kids, right?
Yep. And when you're parroting information, you're limiting yourself by design. And it's a self-inflicted wound that can last a lifetime if you don't learn to go beyond it.
Well, it's funny too, you brought up Thomas Jefferson. I think what he said was like he was appalled that people thought that what they were reading in the newspaper was actually true.
Yeah, or knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is something you awaken to, not something you find in a book.
I got a few more slides here that are right on with this.
Okay.
Let's see. It is true that I've challenged the accuracy or completeness of the Newtonian laws of gravitation and will just as vigorously attack the other sacred laws of Kepler, and any others, either ancient or modern, that need modifying or rewriting to fit the needs of a civilization whose onward march is held back by untruths or half-truths of those who rely upon the deceptive evidence of what their eyes think they see. That was in a New York Times article. So I guess if you read that paper, you're doing okay.
Yeah, that's about 93 years ago.
Yeah.
That he said that. And, he was friends with Adolph Oakes, who owned the New York Times. And he was respected. He actually got to answer his critics when he released the Universal One, and they attacked him. They said, this artist should go back to painting. He has no business treading in areas for which he has no knowledge or experience. And he ended up, the New York Times exchange is just an absolutely incredible back and forth between several different physicists and scientists who were in their heyday in New York, and Dr. Russell just defending himself against their attacks in the editorials. So the op-eds, and he defended himself graciously. Dr. Peter Jackson, I think it was, ultimately after 6 or 7 exchanges over a few weeks' time, had to admit that there is something to Dr. Russell's science that needs to be further studied, this idea of a two-way motion universe. And again, we talked about that. It's ironic that in 1927, Dr. Russell basically presents to the world, the most prominent scientists and universities in the world, a copy of the Universal One, which is basically a two-way motion universe, steady state universe, which is centered by the creator. And just 4 years later, LeMaitre comes along and says, no, it's a one-way heat, death, dying universe. That's all you need to know. The Pope says, great, that verifies Genesis 1:1. And and then there's no more discussion about a two-way universe. So I think we've been railroaded personally, and I'll just say, In regards to that quote, he did attack, and he continued to attack into his 90s, this idea of a one-way heat, death, dying universe. He not only that, he debunked quantum physics in 2 paragraphs, basically calling it a travesty of nature, and to say that energy does not come in packets, right? The true energy behind the universe of effects of motion is the stillness from which those effects of duality divide out of. You know, you have to divide out of something in order to have an opposement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, opposite forces or opposite effects, red and blue color spectrum, light and dark, night and day, up and down, you know, all these opposites, right? Well, what do opposites come from? Each other? No, they come from a unification of opposites. And that's really your trifecta. There's always the triality. Wherever there is dual opposing motion, there must be something that doesn't move in order for the dual opposing motion to be expressed.
Yeah, like a seesaw.
Yeah, exactly. What's moving? Where does the seesaw draw its power? From the fulcrum, right? There would be no motion without the fulcrum. So everybody ignores the fulcrum because their senses don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can open my door and I can slam it and I can go, oh, look, the door moves, but that doesn't tell me what does it move on. How many people look at what the door moves on, or what the wheel moves on, or what we move on, right? Which is the still center that does not move, from which 2 perfectly divided hemispheric reflective images of pure cubic wave field boundaries exists. I mean, it's really right in our face. So
I wanted
it's not an excuse to miss it anymore. We got to start noticing that which doesn't move, because there's the power. That's the power source.
Yeah, they also talk about that in Qigong and stuff like that too, that path right in the center.
And if we're ever going to have technology that doesn't pollute the world, then we also have to notice that. And that's kind of what I've been into in the late, working on some things. I'll get more into that down the road.
Yeah, that'd be awesome if you come on and talk about that sometime. Sometime, no rush.
That'll be very purposeful, and it'll only happen in a specific time frame.
Cool. So when he says energy doesn't come in packets, was he talking about like Planck, like the Plancks that like Max Planck was talking about, like little packets of energy that slowly move up and down?
Planck, Planks.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to clarify that.
Again, it's stuff that he would say just has to go, it needs to go in the wastebasket. And you need to start over, because it has no reality. You know, energy does not exist in packets, and quantum packets or filaments or things or this. You know, that's why you have every kind of quantum from A to Z, quantum abracadabra to quantum zoology, and it's just all a non-existent theoretical model, which really doesn't describe nature in a way that really anybody can even understand.
Yeah.
You know, the 2-way motion universe is where it's at in terms of understanding how nature does things cyclically and in a rhythmic, balanced way, interchanges her sequential polarity in multiple endless reversals. You know, and it's just incredible. And if you don't take it in and understand it, you know, you're locked into this one-way heat, death, dying universe, then so is all the technology you invent is also going to be bound to the laws of the dying universe. And that's why they, you know, the death cult really runs the show in terms of, you know, our spirituality is dead, our philosophies are dead, our sciences are dead, you know, our economics are dead, our governmental structures are dead, our educational and academic structures are dead. Why is that? Could it be because we believe in a dying universe? So would not everything we believe that stems from that major undercurrent, which, you know, is the forward driving force of man, can he not understand that also looking back, he sees the life-giving half of the wave of the dynamic wave of creation, and can then implement a holistic view from the greater field of perception? You know, you're missing the entire again, what do they do but a disservice to remove the creator from its own creation?
Hmm.
You know, let's take one of your favorite authors. If I just handed you the book and said, this just, you know, popped out of nowhere in a big bang, this book fell out and landed right on my desk, but there's no author.
Yeah.
I mean, it just,
Well, Ayn Rand has this epistemology. She has this term called irreducible primaries, where she like takes a theory or takes a philosophy and she breaks it down to its most basic parts. And then you can tell everything from the philosophy that's derived from it after. Right. And so it's like if we break down this heat, death, dying bullshit universe to its irreducible primary, that's what you get: death, nihilism. You get some idiot smashing particles together to get smaller and smaller particles, which you'll just always get smaller particles. There's no point in doing it.
More unstable and more radioactive.
Yeah.
Which, why would you want to tap that as a possible source of power when it only lives for a billionth of a second? I mean, that's really, who's the mastermind behind this?
Fucking idiots doing this.
Well, it's gazillions of dollars wasted, really, because, you know, smashing particles together in a bubble chamber and then, you know, identifying these so-called new elements. You know, it's just total lunacy. It's like a complete waste of time.
The study they're doing, what was that study? You probably brought it up actually in an interview, where they're looking at snowflakes and they're trying to look at how many, you know, the snowflakes to see if there is two snowflakes that are the same or whatever.
2 blades of grass, 2 human cells. I mean, it's
what a fucking waste
endless,
of time.
and the money was endless, and they couldn't find. Everything is perfectly unique, and for good reason. It's designed that way.
Yeah, well, you can see what kind of mind is doing that stuff, right? They're trying to show that, oh yeah, we're all just the same. There is no uniqueness. There is no individuality, right?
Right. And those are the sense-based, materialistic externalists is what I like to call them.
Yeah.
You know, scientifically, they're MEs. It's all about me, me, me. You know, my $250,000 swimming pool and my shows on TV where everybody froths at the mouth and worships the Tysons and the Bill Nyes and the, you know, the science guys and the Michio Cuckoos and all the nut jobs and who just make it their living to, you know, have people, you know, swaying at them and just worship at their feet. You know, I never wanted any of that crap. In fact, I saw right through it after a period of time, especially just getting through the first couple Russell books. Atomic Suicide just utterly, it took science and broke it for me. It broke it in half and no truth fell out of it. But here stands this book and I'm going, I got 2 choices. I can keep reading it. And it literally, I say it melted my brain because it was so intense and so balanced and so well written. You know, I'm not really referring to the beginning of the book, which is more just a lot of, you know, evidential newspaper clippings and mentions about the dangers of atomic power. But when they really get into part 2 and 3 of that book, where they start defining God, defining gravity, defining electricity and magnetism as it truly really is and should be thought of, it just clicked, man. That was it. I was like, at this point, science is dead to me, you know, because it's all wrong. It's all full of half-truths, which is where we extended from in this discussion off that slide that you just showed. So
here I got another one for
time to correct it.
Let's see here. John Taylor Gatto coming up.
There you go.
One of the universal hallmarks of an educated man or woman is that they know how to challenge assumptions. They don't believe everything strangers tell them. But schools are unable to help with this challenging of assumptions for fear that we might challenge the very assumption of forced schooling itself.
Yep. Love the prison. Don't ever question the warden, though.
No. Okay, here we got.
You can hate the prison, but you can't ever question the warden, right? That's what that kind of means.
Absolutely. Check. This is the spit and fire one from you here, Matt. If genius and its knowledge were owed to schools, courses would be taught on genius. Genius, therefore, belongs to something of an entirely different nature and cause, does not come from books. It comes from within the mind and not the outer dualistic world, lest it would be cheapened and sold on every fucking street corner by every knowledge hooker and pimp on earth. That's so good. I had to put that one in there, buddy.
Yeah, well, God, the new age is full of knowledge pimps and hookers just trying to sell you their latest drivel on whatever they think is the latest fashionable truth, as if truth comes in and out of fashion. It doesn't, it just is again. But, you know, again, you've got your entire plethora of scientific lunatics who think their egos are so stroked, and it's like they dump kerosene on themselves just to light themselves on fire so they can burn yet another day, you know, in this vat of fornication, of ego mixing with other egos. And it's pathetic, man. There's no true universal understanding in a lot of the different shows that are put out to the world by the powers that never were. Let's be honest here. You've got all these different so-called stars and personalities who's really in the past 5 years, their opinions have become mute and ignored by most people, because I think there is a dramatic shift taking place, and people are getting sick of knowledge hookers and pimps, because when you follow their knowledge to its end, it gives you nothing in return. It makes a slave out of you. And so if you're ever going to get your mind back, you have to take it back forcefully. And you need to close these books and these opinions and these diatribes and these mercenary, like authoritarian mindset people who are on the street corner, you know, preaching their gospel of knowledge. You know, you've got to knock them off their box. Tell them, go back in your hole. You know, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. There's knowledge that I can come to from my own pursuits and from studying the masters, if you will, the right kinds of people, pointing you to the right kinds of places. And again, that's a discernment that you have to learn over years and years. But ultimately, you get on the path, you start reading from the inspired masters, you start understanding and implementing and becoming self-aware of that knowledge as a existent quality within yourself, then you're upgrading. And you'll eventually get to the point where you'll be able to look down and see why these people are below you and how you used to be below them. So there is a point to the pursuit of self-knowledge, because in terms of, let's call it elevation, you know, we all start in the swamp, right? That's where we begin. College is like the top of the swamp, right?
Yeah.
But then there's certain masters whose roots, you know, become a tree that's 30 meters tall. And you see that tree and you're like standing at the root, at the base of it, going, man, this thing's a giant, and I'm going to climb it. I'm going to see where it takes me, you know. And that's the journey of knowledge. The greatest men maybe have gotten, you know, 1 foot above the swamp, let's say, but there's still the whole rest of that tree to go. You know, Russell was definitely among those at the 1 foot mark, but 1 foot is still 12 inches past the top of the swamp. So
Yeah.
there's 12 grades beyond academia, let's just say, if you want to call it whatever you want. But, and those who have graduated, you know, there's only been a few incredibly knowledgeable and able to physically alter reality in front of the eyes of people. There's only been a handful of those humans in this world, on this planet, and most likely we don't know their names.
Yeah, totally. I feel like even though there's this big push right now with everything going on in the world, and a lot of people are getting pretty down, pretty negative, but it's like, I feel it's almost the same as like what Neil Young did. You know, he canceled himself. I feel like these people are canceling themselves.
Thank you, Pluto.
Yeah,
The
totally.
self-canceling planet has returned. You know, they tried to cancel Pluto, and now look what's happening. You're not a planet. Oh yeah, watch me, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
You know? Now they're being canceled. It's hilarious. I think it's divine justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, I got one more slide here, and then maybe we'll shut her down for the day.
Sure.
I've got a bunch more slides, but we could maybe pick it up at another time.
Absolutely.
The law of balance can be expressed as the equilibrium between the opposites of duality, the centeredness of the oneness of the self. And there we got these rhythmic balanced interchange, the RBIs, but not baseball.
There you go.
The keystone of the entire structure of the spiritual and physical universe is rhythmic balanced interchange between all opposites.
What do you think, Luke, would happen if night withheld from day, or if the clouds withheld water from the earth? That's exactly what that means, is that what if your inhalation withheld from your exhalation? What if your exhalation withheld from your inhalation? What if your stomach withheld from your intestines? What if your bladder withheld from your urinary tract? What would happen? We see death is what would happen. So without that rhythmic balance interchange between all opposites, if you are staying up for days and days, what happens? You lose your mind. Okay, so it's easy to see why this is the law of this universe, because any violation of that law creates and sets up an unbalanced, whose interchange is then destruction. And it's really just goes to show you that people really don't understand how simple of a concept this is. The law of balance, there is only one law, and that is balance. And Russell himself said, if you need 2 words, let those words be rhythmic balance. If you need 3 words, let those words be rhythmic balance interchange. And he wrote these words down from his divine illumination. So it's more or less the creator speaking through him. And that is absolutely the simplest. And again, as he said, the simplest story is always the hardest to tell. And I think that's where we're at. We're looking at such complex effects in human civilization, which are all a result of not understanding the simplicity and the natural simplicity of this universal construct in which we find ourselves in. And so we have this grandstanding on knowledge. Everybody's hookering and pimping, right? Wanting their books to sell, wanting the crowds to surround them and cheer for them, and their groupies and their fanites, and just all the whole rigmarole of it all. But ultimately, it's all very simple. And again, it's why I hold Russell to be one of the greatest non-academicians of all time, one of the greatest philosophers, in my opinion, because his philosophy is a philosophy about the nature of the universe and how it works. And between him and his wife, Leo, they really created the balance between it, the male and female balance, and something about self-multiplication must be said in that when you pair yourself up with the right mate, you can multiply your power, and up to 8 times more than just working alone. And so they were a living demonstration of that. Was 2 of the most inspirational people I've ever read, and I'm very happy to have been a part of preserving that legacy so that future generations can hopefully take even a little bit from it. I took so much from it and have done so much with it, and just continue to keep, moving mountains, as it were.
Well, and his work is about the knowledge. It's not about him. You know what I mean? It's not about me. And I feel like I don't want to lump myself in here with you guys, but I feel like that's what you've done. That's what I'm doing here. The show's not about me. It's about trying to bring forth this knowledge to inspire others.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you're not doing anything with the knowledge, then you're probably not doing what you should be. So if you're worshiping the bringer of knowledge, then you've lost the way already. The point is not to worship the knowledge, nor worship the bringer of it. The point is to worship that which understands and inculcates and implements that knowledge into and through your soul, to be expressed outwardly through your 2 strong arms. These 2 things are, I've got a blister here from working. Did a whole bunch of work I work every day, but without these, and unfortunately, this is in most people's hands nowadays instead of this.
Right.
Well, what about the paintbrush? How about the clay sculptor? How about the musical instrument, the violin? How come those aren't in people's hands? And you're seeing more of this in hands and less creativity in hands. And that's again why I was saying, you have to know when to push the world aside and just go into the quiet of your studio or the quiet of your greenhouse or the kitchen, whatever it is you like to do that's creative. Surround yourself with it, imbue yourself with it, and find yourself being creative, because you always got time to pick this thing back up. It's going to be there when you get home. It's going to be on your hip. So I think for all of us, and I'm saying this to myself as much as everyone else, we should learn to put that damn thing down, and start doing things with our real physical bodies out in the real world. That's where it's at. You're taking part in creation, not just watching others do it.
You're a co-creator is what Tolkien said.
Bingo.
Co-creating with God. Yeah, and
Man,
that's why
right on. Yep.
I don't even have one of those things, because it's just too much.
Right.
People are calling you when you're at work. I'm working. It's like, like you pick it up, you think something's going on. No. So I haven't had one of those for years now. And I feel like that's part of the dumbing down of people too, is the reliance on these technological tools. They can never make AI as smart as a human being. So they have to dumb human beings down so that we actually look at these devices like gods.
Right. Well, there's two uses to all technology. I couldn't have done what I did with university without one, so I did use it in a way that was beneficial.
But it's a tool, just like your body. It's not the master,
Yep. But the thing I'm worried about, what I'm more or less focusing on, is the addictiveness of it.
Yeah.
Especially in young kids who should be out getting their hands dirty in nature, playing in the mud with, little Hot Wheels cars or whatever, instead of, doing these apps and all this stuff that is meaningless at the end of the day. And there's nothing that lifts their little minds up to a higher level.
It's like becoming a slave to a hammer or a shovel rather than using it as the tool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I see.
Yeah, staring at the hammer, but never actually building anything with it. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's all the tools that we use to do this stuff. We don't, the tool doesn't own us. We own it, so.
Yeah, well, this is one of the only tools that looks back at you. So
right,
their technology is two-way. They just don't want us to know that the universe.
It's like a scrying device. I've heard people say you're like looking in, when you look into the abyss stares back.
Yeah, there are a lot of these psychopaths in the abyss too. There's no doubt there. It's been nice to join you again.
Yeah, we'll shut her down here for today, and thanks again for joining me, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, sounds good. I think this was a stellar talk today, so we'll have one next week and just keep doing this until we get to the end, huh?
Absolutely. That sounds great, Matt. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I've really enjoyed this.
Okay.
Hope everyone else does too.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, everyone.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Take care.